Poetry Center, bringing poetry to Paterson since 1980 at Passaic County Community College.
Our next poet is Mark Hillinghouse, and Mark also is a wonderful photographer. And there's some of his artwork is in this building, in this hallway. And his work has just gotten stronger and stronger, not only his poetry, but his photography. Mark has 3 times been nominated for a Pushcart Prize and a 3 times recipient of the New Jersey State Council on the Arts Fellowships. He's a published poet, essayist and photographer whose work has been widely published in literary journals and exhibited in area galleries. His recent book, Between Frames, was published last year by Serving House Books. Visit his website at http://mhillinghouse.zenfolio.com. And he has an exhibit now in New York, and he just won first prize in that exhibit, and you have to tell them the name of the place where it's exhibited. Let's welcome Mark Hillinghouse.
Thank you, Maria. It's the Soho Art House on Sullivan Street. Actually, this is the cover. The photograph was the last SUM grate. This was installed about 1910 when the Edison hydroelectric plant was being installed at the base of the falls. And the SUM, of course, was Society for Useful Manufacturers, was founded by Alexander Hamilton. And this was the last one. It's still there, and I had to crawl under a barbed wire fence to get my big body under that thing. And I actually, was able to get that shot. I usually like low-light photography, so in the middle of the day, the best you can do is structure, black and white, and things like that. But I just love this. So I was so glad she chose this for the cover. This poem is actually, it is about a photograph, too. I love photographing fog. I love low-light photography. And this was a day that I work at the college, but the fog was so beautiful that day, I had to call in sick. That's what you do, It's a fog day, call in sick. And it's for my friend, Louis Ruiz, who also works at the college. And he called in sick, too. I sit in my living room, where I always sit, in my cracked, half-fake leather recliner. I stare unfocused, staring until my eyes pull in the framed museum prints of Japanese paintings, and one of my own photographs, a river landscape with muted foreground, trees and branches, a clump of winter woods covered in fog, the air gray and mysterious, the river like smoked glass, the boughs of the trees, their black branches touching the water's mirrored surface, like those Zen ink washes of pine trees. I was so happy to be out shooting that day along the Passaic that I called in sick. I called my friend Louis to meet me by the river. I was looking for God that morning. If there is a God, she hides in fog along the river. If there were a better word for things we can't name, it would look like this pale, soft gray world the Zen painters wanted to suggest in their deep reverence for nature, for things we can't name. Thomas Berger writes, images represent something absent, and I believe in the absence which fills the spaces I inhabit as I go. In Hasegawa Tahaku's pine trees, a dense fog fills 6 wood panels. The pines recede into snow-covered mountains, covered in mist. Delicate brushwork renders each needle. Walking through the fog, all life becomes muted and etched for a moment's exposure, and so colorless that I forget it's a color print, and notice there's one last brown leaf left dangling from a twig.
And of course, I didn't say that that's Mark's photograph. Our next poet is Laura Boss, and I always forget how short I am until I stand next to Mark. I used to make fun of my mother for being short. You always get paid back for all your crappy behavior. Laura Boss is the first place winner of PSA's Gordon Barber Poetry Contest, founder and editor of Lips Magazine. Her awards also include 3 fellowships in poetry from the New Jersey State Council on the Arts, the first International Poetry Award at the International Poetry Festival in Swansea, Wales, and an Alta Award. Her books include On the Edge of the Hudson, Arms, New and Selected Poems, and Flashlight. And most recently, she co-edited with John Gallagher, Time is a Toy, the selected poems of Michael Benedict. Let's welcome Laura Boss.
Thanks, Maria, for all you do for all of us. I just want to say how happy I am to be here reading with you and listening to your poems. This is our Patterson family. Tour guide. Years ago, I somehow was a tour guide for one of Bangladesh's most beloved poets and his wife, who had come to visit me at my tiny apartment perched on the New Jersey side of the Palisades, with its view of the dazzling New York skyline from the Empire State Building to the Statue of Liberty, the cruise ships like the Queen Elizabeth II sailing down the Hudson, and in the distance the World Trade Towers when they were still visible, rather than their post-9/11 absence you notice today. He looked at my bookshelves filled with not just my own books, but also my friends and those poets I had studied at college, including my collection of some first edition Robert Frost from his reading at Douglass when I was a college freshman. My visitor told me how he loved Robert Frost and only wished he had some of Frost's books. On impulse, I gave him my Frost books, though in retrospect, I could have used the money today those books would bring me, though probably I could not get myself to sell them, even now. He gave me his book, which included the other three most famous poets in Bangladesh. He told me more than 1,000 listeners would show up for their readings in their country. I thought how about 40 had shown up for my last reading in New York City. He said he also loved William Carlos Williams, and I said I'd be glad to drive him to Williams' house on Ridge Road in Rutherford, and later to the Great Falls in Patterson that Williams wrote about. My visitor was ecstatic at that suggestion, but first his wife, and maybe he too, wanted to see the New York City Macy's. After I drove through the tunnel to Manhattan and we wandered through the aisles of that massive store, his wife and I being sprayed with cologne as we walked by the cosmetic counters, we got back in my car and headed to Rutherford and Ridge Road, where we looked up at the attic where that happy genius had written so many of his poems, and then we drove to nearby Patterson, down Broadway, past the once manicured lawns of the mansions of the East Side, and farther down Broadway, past the bond bailsman shops and the bodegos, with groups of men waiting for someone or something, past the school kids in their school uniforms, walking home with their book bags, and the lightness that after-school dismissal brings, not just in Patterson at 3 p.m., but almost every town. Past the still stately Danforth Library that once was not surrounded by security guards, past the women chattering in Spanish with their bags of groceries from Seatown, and finally across the tiny bridge and the Passaic River, and past Libby's Luncheonette and to the parking space where Alexander Hamilton's graffiti-stained statue stared at the Great Falls, as we did. The falls were powerful and lush that day, an iridescent rainbow in their cascade. Suddenly, we were silent. William Carlos Williams' ghost seemed to hover nearby. There was no need for words. The poems would come back in thunder of this moment for this visiting poet, and maybe even me, perhaps decades from now, perhaps tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Here's your CD. Our next poet is Madeline Tiger. And just a second, Maddie, I just have to find your... Madeline has been writing and teaching for over 50 years. 11 collections of her poems have been published. Her poems appear in many journals and anthologies. She lives in Bloomfield, New Jersey, under a weeping cherry tree. That would be Maddie. Let's welcome Madeline Tiger.
But have you lost your balance like me?
Well,
One of the things you lose when you get this old, beside losing your waistline and your fingernails and your hair, you lose your balance. And all of this is because I fell down. So watch me make sure I don't fall down again. But thank you very much. It's nice to see my friends and my new friends. I see lots of familiar faces. Oh, I have to take off these gorgeous sunglasses, which it turns out they didn't make into reading glasses. They just made them for distance, stupidly. So now here I am. And this is the shortest poem in the book, I think. And I have the smallest edition in the book. I'm so glad to be in this book with you all. It's lovely. Now, you have to guess who the main character is in this poem. I changed the title so that everybody would have to guess. It's called Wildflowers. He paroled words carefully, letting them loose like somnolent chickens, scratching, bemused, forming simple, long-legged phrases, wary on the white factory streets of early morning. He never stopped the waking city. His motor kept on controlling the syllables you heard. New, and then only suddenly in New Jersey, where we came upon him in contagion and crazed exuberance, he alone, the dancing prisoner of imagination. Little flaneur, little doctor, you pulled wildflowers from the dirty roadsides of Patterson, kudzu, chicory, yarrow, outside the hospital, an old man singing hoarsely, not a hero. Who is it?
Appeared recently or are forthcoming in the Writer's Chronicle, Shenandoah, Brilliant Corners, The Hollands Critic, I can't read that. Bayou Magazine and elsewhere. He was the winner of the Allen Ginsberg Poetry Award and the Academy of American Poets College Prize. He currently serves as poetry editor for Harper Pallet, and he was recently nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Let's welcome Dante DiStefano.
It's so nice to be here and hear all these wonderful poems, and thank you, Maria. Love is a stone endlessly in flight. The great falls strike their silk upon bullheads and trout my father never fished for there. He was about other rivers and falls, about other waters, vagrant currents, calling him home, calling him Dominic, telling stories of a man, forever a boy, in photographs from the 50s, wearing a cowboy hat with a cap gun cocked in his hand. The Passaic River didn't call him, but the Shenango did. It cut like a glacier through the basalt of millennia. Oh, Patterson, oh, Williams, what I mean to say is just this. My father's people made their way through trades as dishwashers and factory workers in a city that had no Passaic to buttress it. They and he were always skipping stones in elsewhere rushing eddies, dreaming flocks they wouldn't tend, and orchards full of apples they could never harvest. O rivers of the world, my father died in my arms as I carried him almost to the hospice bed. It was an honor to stoop and cradle him on the threshold of the afterlife, where he, I hope, skips stones with the broken vowels of immigrant angels. Holy green waters that roll on forever. When I went to his fresh grave, I wanted to lay down on the flowers and sleep there or hug the dirt, but instead I sifted through the packed soil and found 4 flat pebbles to give to my mother. Because the stone lives, the flesh dies, and we know nothing of death or its mills that churn into a place that is not home. Great falls, strike your silk upon the bullheads, and guide my father to a street lined with linden, where the difficult labor of living is done. O spent shell, from the final volley, I hold you in my palm, and I know no metaphor can honor a father. A chance word, William said, upon paper may destroy the world. Dear Dad, I write you exact words dictated by the whirlpool that forms at the confluence of other rivers. Yes, love is a stone endlessly in flight.
Our next writer is Bruce Lowry, and Bruce is a career newspaper journalist and a native Southerner. His poems have been published widely, most recently in Poet Lore, Louisiana Literature, and Kestrel. He lives in Union County, New Jersey. Let's welcome Bruce Lowry.
Thank you, Maria. It's an honor to be here, and I just want to tell Joe, you know, the falls are haunted, you know, so you go up there, and so wild things happen. So I think this poem sort of arose out of a experience I had going up there at lunchtime one day with a clementine in my hand, though there's no clementine in the poem. It's called Message in a Bottle for William Carlos Williams. I open the blood orange and think of you as a girl in Sicily, brown hair to the shoulder, chocolate ice smudged against your cheek, then standing before the falls a decade later with a pimply Polish boy watching the fates rush by and faces of broken branches, rough-hewn waters, Kerouac likened to Apache horses charging down mountain passes, night wind in their manes, fury in their faces, burning through the wet splash, over rock face and fish trace, falls once entombed in ice, splintered by elements, splintering my hands now on the bridge rail, as I watch 3 teenagers cast lines with black poles, pulling up perch, choked with toxin, green gold modernity, radiant in the gills. Oh, so much the purple sky, sea spray hitting my lips, your eyes, causing me to sing arias I never heard, languages falling away into cisterns of gray light. Thank you.
We're going to do a little switcheroo here, and I'm going to have Sophia Barrett read next because her son's graduating from college in Connecticut, so she has to go and be at her son's graduation. Sophia is an almost 30-year veteran New Jersey public school teacher with a husband, 3 sons, 2 dogs, and a cat she loves. Her book, I Tell Random People About You, won the Spire Poetry Prize in 2010. She also has a chapbook and various poems published in various places, including, I'm proud to say, in the Patterson Literary Review. Let's welcome Svea Barrett.
She's so kind. It's a long drive. My poem is actually on page 47, and it's called She's Back. Our poor Lady Passaic was so poisoned by the people that signs along her banks still warn of fines for catching blue crabs and cancer if you eat them. In a battle for a local Senate seat, one dude wanted to protect her from pollution. The other said she hides all the bodies that float from shootings in the first one's city of Newark. But like the tiny chickadee and finch-like birds that nest on the letter A in my town's 24-hour pharmacy sign, nature's sneaking back to our poor river, and she's rising from the dead. Striped bass now swim her brackish currents, feeding long-legged egrets and blue herons. Fleets of skulls skim across Our Lady Passaic's smooth, healing skin, dodging debris as they flee. Thank you.